Amid the arid lands where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers meet, where humankind first learned to plant seeds, carve symbols into clay, and dream of gods, was born a tale so ancient it stretches beyond the limits of imagination. It is the story of the Anunnaki, the rulers from the heavens, divine beings said to have created humanity, shaped the order of the universe, and then vanished into the drifting sands of time. But who were they, truly? Gods, symbols, or perhaps travelers from distant stars? In this video, we will journey back more than 4,000 years to the dawn of the Sumerian civilization, the cradle where the legend of the Anunnaki first took form. Layer by layer, as we uncover the earth and the ancient clay tablets beneath, we will begin to see how the people of that forgotten age perceived life, death, and the meaning of human existence. So let this gentle narration carry you through these long-forgotten myths, a journey both mysterious and soothing, tender enough to lull you towards sleep, yet stirring just enough curiosity to keep your mind wandering, until you drift away with the story of the Anunnaki. And as the moonlight pours over the ancient land of Mesopotamia, its golden barley fields shimmering faintly beneath the quiet night sky, one can almost hear, carried softly on the wind, the distant songs of the bricklayers of Uruk. And somewhere in that echoing darkness flickers the presence of the oldest gods humanity ever imagined, the Anunnaki. Their story is not merely a myth, it is a mirror, reflecting the soul of the very first civilization, the moment humanity began to ask where it came from. Before the Bible, before Zeus or Osiris, there were Anu, Enlil, and Enki. Before humankind dreamt of heaven and hell, there were clay tablets engraved with the names of the Anunnaki, those who came down from the heavens. And now, as we gently close our eyes in the calm of the night, let us turn back the wheel of time, returning to the birthplace of all faiths and legends, where humankind first dared to imagine the beings who made them. Anunnaki, in the Sumerian tongue, means the offspring of Anu, the god of the sky, a pantheon of ancient, majestic deities believed to form the foundation of cosmic order. They appear in countless carvings, hymns, and rituals, revered by the Sumerians as the supreme council of the divine realm. They were not just distant names, but embodiments of power, justice, and balance, ideals that early humans yearned for amid a chaotic and uncertain world. In the earliest cities, Eridu, Uruk, their temples rose high above the desert, serving as the spiritual and political heart of society. The Sumerians never separated the divine from the material world. To them, every drop of water from the Euphrates, every gust of wind from the heavens, was proof of sacred presence. The Anunnaki did not dwell far above. They walked among men, observing, deciding, guiding. When farmers sowed their seeds, they prayed to Enki for water. When potters stoked their kilns, they thanked Utu for the gift of light. Each daily act was, in essence, a small offering to the celestial court. Yet what made the Anunnaki truly unique among the gods of the ancient world was not their power, but the way they mirrored Sumerian society itself. In the Mesopotamian mind, the cosmos was a two-tiered kingdom, heaven and earth reflecting one another. Above was King Anu, below the king of men, above the divine council, below the council of nobles. Every god held a duty, every being a role, just as every citizen within the city had their place. Myth in this sense was not merely faith, it was the earliest form of political philosophy. According to clay tablets unearthed from Nippur and Ur, the Anunnaki comprised the chief deities Enlil, god of air and authority, keeper of kingship; Enki, god of water, wisdom and creation; Ninhursag, Mother Earth, goddess of fertility; Inanna, goddess of love, desire and war; and Utu Shamash, the sun god, embodiment of justice. Together, they formed a council, a divine reflection of earthly governance. It was a perfect symmetry between divine law and human order, between cosmic will and social structure. To the modern reader, these ancient texts may seem like faint reflections through a dusty mirror, crude carvings of a bygone age. Yet within those markings lies a deep human wisdom. Though called gods, the Anunnaki bore all too human traits. They loved, they raged, they grew weary, they erred. They created mankind not for worship, but because they themselves needed help. The myth of weary gods who fashioned humans to bear their labor is one of the most profound social allegories of the Sumerian world, a reminder that even divinity depends on cooperation, that order itself survives only when every being shoulders their part in the vast machinery of existence. Thus, the Anunnaki were not only the origin of gods, but the first archetype of organized power. When the Sumerians gazed up at the night sky, they did not merely see stars, they saw celestial administrators, each star a deity, each planetary motion a divine decree. Weather, harvest, illness, war, all were manifestations of the Anunnaki's will. The universe, in their eyes, functioned like a grand court, where every event had meaning and every storm a message. This humanization of divinity made the Anunnaki the most alive of all ancient gods. They were not distant or omnipotent, as later deities would become. Rather, they were near, sometimes capricious, yet deeply compassionate. Their stories reflected human fear and hope, and the boundless imagination of early minds striving to understand nature's mysteries. When thunder rolled, the Sumerians did not tremble. They said, "Enlil is speaking." When the river flooded, they believed Enki was testing their faith. And when harvest thrived, they offered gifts, not out of fear, but in gratitude, for the universe still held its balance. Today, when we look back, the Anunnaki are often entangled in strange modern theories of ancient astronauts, of cosmic visitors who seeded life on Earth. But if we brush aside that mist of speculation, what remains is something far more human, our primal instinct to make sense of the world. The Sumerians had no telescopes, no science, but they had imagination, and that imagination bridged heaven and earth through the language of symbols. Within that vision, the Anunnaki were born, not merely as gods, but as reflections of ourselves, wise yet flawed, powerful yet fragile. So the story of the Anunnaki is far from boring, despite what boring history for sleep might suggest. It is, in truth, a soft, ancient hymn, slow yet resonant, recounting the moment humanity first realized it was part of a grander cosmos. When we listen to their tale in the quiet of night, we are hearing the voices of those who first dared to dream, who carved their dreams into clay, so that thousands of years later, we might still read them. And perhaps that is why the legend of the Anunnaki endures. Because it is not only the story of gods, but the story of us, the eternal seekers of meaning amid chaos, still hoping that somewhere above, an invisible hand keeps the universe from falling apart. Now, as we stand at the threshold of myth, close your eyes and imagine the whispering winds over Eridu's ancient walls, the scent of earth after Euphrates' rain, the flicker of oil lamps dancing upon carved stone within the temple of Eabzu. That is where the world began, where the first gods of humankind, the Anunnaki, reigned. And from that moment onward, the journey of humanity, with all its dreams, fears, and eternal longing, was set into motion. As the light of the Anunnaki began to descend upon the earth, the Sumerians believed it marked the birth of order within a once formless world. And that order did not exist only in the divine realm of the gods. It was reflected within humankind itself, those who bore the breath of clay and the blood of heaven. After the gods had established the laws that governed the cosmos, they sought a place to plant the seeds of life, a land fertile enough to nurture both the body and the soul. That land lay between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the lush plain that humanity would one day call Sumer, the very first cradle of civilization. If the Anunnaki were the architects of cosmic order, then the Sumerians were the first builders of human order. At the meeting point of water and sand, flood and desert, they performed a miracle, turning a harsh wilderness into an earthly Eden. Every drop of water guided through their winding canals. Every grain of barley sown into the soil was a sacred act. For in the Sumerian mind, labor itself was a ritual, and cultivation was humanity's way of moving in harmony with the will of the gods. There was no boundary between work and worship, between the sweat of men and the grace of the Anunnaki. Imagine the first dawn over the Mesopotamian plain, mist still clinging to the river's edge, farmers bending to the earth, their hands caked with mud, yet their eyes shining with purpose. In the distance, the ringing of hammers echoed. The first builders of Eridu, the city regarded as humanity's first home, laying brick upon brick, and atop its highest point rose the Iabzu temple, dedicated to Enki, god of water, wisdom, and creation. It was more than a structure. It was a symbol of awakening, the birth of human consciousness to the sacred order, the belief that every event had meaning and every achievement, purpose. The rise of Sumerian civilization was no accident. It was the culmination of millennia of observation, patience, and faith in the unchanging laws set forth by the Anunnaki. When humankind learned to mark time by the stars, to measure seasons by the flow of rivers, and to preserve memory through written signs, history itself began. In Sumer, the world's first writing, cuneiform, emerged. The symbols pressed into clay did more than record grain or livestock. They preserved the words of the gods so that humans might read, remember, and pass them on. Writing transformed thought into reality and memory into eternity. In that moment, humanity crossed the threshold from instinct into consciousness. Through writing, society found its form. Law, governance, economy, and faith merged into one harmonious structure, and at the heart of it all remained the conviction that every earthly order mirrored the divine order above. What is truly wondrous is that, while other people still roamed as nomads, the Sumerians had already built an organized urban world. They raised cities, divided districts, established offices, levied taxes, and performed national rituals. Yet unlike purely secular rule, Sumerian authority was always sanctified. The king was not merely a ruler, he was the mediator between the Anunnaki and mankind. He received decrees from Enlil, carried out the will of Enki, and ensured that the world below stayed aligned with the cosmic law above. Within this structure lies a revelation. The Sumerians unknowingly laid the foundations for the very ideas of government, justice, and morality. They were the first to believe that society must have law, not only to protect humans, but to preserve harmony with nature and the divine. Every decree, whether about land or debt, carried a deeper meaning, an expression of the cosmic fairness the Anunnaki embodied. In cities like Uruk and Nippur, temples rose high as stairways to the heavens. These were ziggurats, symbols of connection between mankind and the gods. Each level represented a realm, earth, air, and sky. As worshippers ascended, they believed they were climbing through the layers of existence, drawing closer to the light of Anu. Perhaps in those moments, humanity first sensed the concept of the soul, that invisible thread binding mortal life to the eternal. Many scholars say the Sumerians did not invent religion. They invented the language of religion. They did more than worship gods. They defined the relationship between deity and man. To them, the world was not a gift from heaven, but a covenant. Humanity was obliged to uphold order through labor, offering, and virtue. In return, the Anunnaki maintained the balance among nature, humankind, and the universe. That philosophy became the seed of every faith to follow, from Babylonian theology to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Yet behind the brilliance of civilization lay the shadow of fear. Sumer was not only a land of creation, but of fragility, floods, droughts, plagues. Each reminded the people that even with cities built and temples raised, they remained small before divine power. That vulnerability made Sumerian faith profoundly sincere. They did not pray for immortality. They prayed for continuity, that order might endure, that the gods might never turn away. In every festival and hymn, gratitude intertwined with fear, for they knew every blessing demanded reverence. It was within this tension, between belief and dread, hope and fate, that Sumerian civilization flourished. They invented the wheel, forged bronze, composed poetry, sang hymns, and wrote the world's first epic, Gilgamesh, a story of death and the longing for eternal life. None of these were mere arts or technologies. They were dialogues with the universe. In truth, Sumer was the first miracle granted by the Anunnaki, not the miracle of fire or thunder, but the miracle of awareness. For the first time, humanity realized it could understand the world, reshape it, and leave a mark upon it. Those humble clay tablets, unearthed thousands of years later, still echo with the same human voice. We have lived, we have understood, and we have told our story. From that moment, every civilization that followed, Babylon, Assyria, Greece, Egypt, became merely new chapters in the book Sumer had begun. Every time a temple was built, a law written. or a prayer whispered beneath the stars. It was an echo of that ancient legacy. And when we look back, we see that the story of the Anunnaki cannot be separated from the story of Sumer, for gods exist only through those who believe in them. This civilization was born not just of labor, but of faith, faith in the sanctity of order itself. That belief lifted humanity from the dust, awakening it as a being that could dream, create, and remember. Thus, when we speak of the birth of Sumerian civilization, we are not merely speaking of bricks or tablets, but of the moment the human soul awoke. And from that awakening began our own journey. We, the distant descendants of Sumer and the Anunnaki. A journey not just to conquer the world, but to rediscover our origins, where gods and mortals once together built the dawn of history. And when the Sumerian civilization began to blossom between the two rivers, when humankind had learned to record time through writing and measure the seasons by the shadow of the sun, they began to ask a question greater than all others. Who created the sky, the earth, and themselves? The towering cities of Uruk and Nippur, the temples reaching into the clouds, seemed still insufficient to satisfy that deep yearning for understanding. People gazed up at the night sky, where countless stars shimmered like the eyes of divine beings, and from that wonder, they began to weave the first cosmic tapestry in human history, the Sumerian cosmology, a vision where gods and the world blended together like notes in an endless symphony. According to the Sumerians, all beginnings came from An and Ki, heaven and earth. An was the high, radiant sky, source of light and divine law. Kai was the fertile earth, womb of all life. When an embraced Ki in his arms, the world was born. And from that sacred union emerged the first generation of gods, the Anunnaki. They did not appear as all-powerful beings, but as living forces of nature, wind, water, light, earth, love, and growth. Each god was a symbol, a pulse within the eternal rhythm of the cosmos. It was the moment when humanity began to see the world with both innocence and depth. They did not separate the divine from nature, nor place themselves at the center. In the Sumerian worldview, humans were but one link in the vast chain of existence, while the gods were the souls of every phenomenon. When the wind blew, it was Enlil, god of air and authority, passing by. When water flowed, it was Enki, god of wisdom and creation, bestowing his blessing. When the sun rose, Utu opened the eyes of justice to illuminate the world. Each day, people lived among the gods without even knowing it, for they believed that God and man shared the same breath. The birth of the Sumerian gods was not merely folklore, it was humanity's first language of symbolism, their way of decoding the mysteries of existence. When they saw lightning, they did not call it a natural event, but said, Enlil is angry. When the floodwaters rose, they whispered, Enki is testing humankind. In this way, they transformed chaos into order, fear into faith. Each deity was a living metaphor, a human face for the unseen laws of nature. At the center of this grand design stood the Council of the Anunnaki, a divine assembly of the most powerful gods who gathered to determine the fate of the world. Like a celestial court, their hierarchy reflected Sumerian society on Earth, with kings, officials, laws, and order, and was the supreme ruler, the embodiment of ultimate authority. Enlil held the keys to kingship, governing wind and storm. Enki, the wise one, mediated between gods and men. Ninhursag, the Earth Mother, was the source of all life, and Inanna, goddess of love, war, and desire, was the flame of transformation, the restless force that ensured the universe would never stand still. Through this divine order, the Sumerians perceived the balance of existence. Each god represented a facet of life, light and darkness, order and chaos, birth and death. No deity was omnipotent, and none were purely good or evil. All existed in relation to one another, like interlocking gears within a vast cosmic machine. And within that movement, humankind found its place, small yet meaningful. Among them, Enki, the god of wisdom and water, was revered as the one who understood the human heart best. He ruled not only over rivers and seas, but also over knowledge, creativity, and understanding. Enki did not command, he taught. Through him, the Sumerians learned writing, architecture, and the ways of society. In his figure, one glimpses the profound difference between Sumerian religion and many others that followed. Their gods were not distant rulers, but teachers, guiding humanity toward harmony with the world. Yet even in that radiant order, shadow lingered. For if there existed a god of justice, there must also be a god of night. If there was life, there must also be death. To the Sumerians, balance was eternal. No power, not even divine, was absolute. Even the Anunnaki themselves, the oldest of all gods, would one day give way to new generations as the rhythm of the cosmos shifted. This was not myth alone. It was a philosophy ahead of its time. Every power has its limit, and even the sacred must evolve. Thus, the story of the gods was also the story of humankind. The Sumerians created their deities not to worship blindly, but to reflect their own nature. Enlil symbolized authority, yet authority without compassion could destroy. Enki embodied wisdom, yet unchecked knowledge could sow chaos. Inanna represented love, both the source of life and the cause of war. Through their gods, the Sumerians taught themselves ethics, humility, and balance. In the grand temples of Uruk, offerings were not made merely to seek blessings, but to remind all of the harmony between cosmic forces. If Enlil raged, they prayed for Enki to calm him. If floods rose, they honored Ninhursag to shield the land. Every ritual carried the belief that the universe was alive, a system of cause and consequence, where human actions resonated through the divine. Thus, morality was not just a social rule, but a sacred duty, an act of maintaining universal balance. What astonishes us today is how modern the Sumerian worldview feels, despite being over 4 millennia old. It was neither rigid nor absolutist. It did not divide good and evil sharply, but embraced the relativity and transformation of all things. This was the spiritual foundation that allowed Sumer to thrive, not just materially, but intellectually and philosophically. In a harsh world of floods, droughts, and uncertainty, the belief that everything had purpose, that even suffering had meaning, became a salve for humanity's oldest anxiety. And from that same understanding arose the idea of destiny. The Sumerians believed that every life was inscribed by the council of the Anunnaki, yet through will, devotion, and justice, one might soften the decree of fate. Here lay one of the most beautiful reconciliations in human thought, the coexistence of freedom and destiny, an idea that would echo through centuries of philosophy and faith. When we read the ancient epics, Enuma Elish, Atrahasis, we see more than tales of divine conflict. We see a metaphor for the motion of the universe, a cycle of creation and destruction, chaos and order. Within that cycle, the Anunnaki were the first architects, laying the foundations of the conceptual world humanity would build upon for thousands of years. The Sumerian cosmology did not end with mythology. It flowed into every breath of daily life. It shaped how people viewed themselves, their communities, and the natural world. Every structure they built, every poem they composed, every wedge-shaped mark they pressed into clay carried the same silent faith that the universe was a harmonious song, and humanity was but a single note within it, small but indispensable. And when night fell over the ancient plains, we can imagine the Sumerians lifting their gaze toward the sky, where thousands of stars flickered above. To them, those were not distant suns, but the lamps of the gods, Enlil, Enki, Inanna, watching over the world they had shaped. In their eyes there was reverence, awe, and a quiet knowing that gods and mortals, heaven and earth, were all woven from the same thread. From that moment on, myth became more than a story for sleepless nights. It became a torch that illuminated the human soul. And in its glow, the divine world of Sumer expanded further, leading us to the next chapter in humanity's grand journey, the creation of humankind, when the Anunnaki chose to breathe the first living soul into clay. And then, while the gods were still busy arranging the order of the cosmos, and the rivers quietly flowed across the Sumerian plain, an idea slowly took shape. The idea of a life that thinks, breathes, and dreams. The world of the gods was complete, and ruled the high sky, Kai the earth, Enki the waters, Enlil the winds, Inanna love. But who would guard, tend, and honor that work? Who would offer sacrifices, sing the songs, and carve the gods' names onto clay tablets? In that instant, the notion of humankind was born, a small spark in the vast universe, yet one that made even the gods pause and ponder. According to Sumerian legend, when the gods had fashioned heaven and earth, They soon realized that to maintain order and nourish the world, there needed to be working hands, beings who could shoulder the heavy labor on their behalf. The gods, despite their power, knew fatigue. They had built rivers and mountains and set the seasons, but as the world began to run, they themselves needed an intermediate creature, intelligent enough to understand commands, yet weak enough not to challenge the divine. Thus, in a heavenly council, the decision was made. Humanity would be created from earth, water, and the breath of the gods. Enki, god of wisdom and water, played the central role in that event. He knew that life could not be merely animated clay. There had to be something more, and a soul, a sacred spark. Together with Ninhursag, the goddess of fertility, Enki took mud from the depths of the Euphrates, mixed it with the blood of a deity sacrificed. Some say it was Kingu, the rebel who had opposed the Anunnaki's order. They kneaded that mixture with divine hands, whispered the oldest incantations of the cosmos, then breathed the first breath into it. And so, from the damp earth, humankind rose, trembling in the first light of dawn, amid the river's whisper and the scent of fresh soil. That moment, in Sumerian culture, was more than a mere creation myth. It was the birth of consciousness. When divine breath mingled with clay, humans became the bridge between heaven and earth, matter and spirit, the mundane and the sacred. They were not born only to exist, but to know. In the eyes of the first humans, the heavens were reflected, as if the gods were gazing back. From that instant, a permanent bond formed between gods and humanity, at once a grace and a burden. But why did the gods need humans so much? The answer contains a deep philosophy. The Sumerians did not think the gods created humans solely to command them. They believed humans were part of a grand plan of balance. If the universe was a machine, humans were the small gears that kept it running smoothly. They tilled the earth so Mother Earth would not fall asleep. They offered sacrifices so the gods would not be forgotten. They loved, dreamed, and suffered, so life would continue to flow. In that world, human meaning did not lie in power, but in harmonious existence. However, as with every myth, the birth of humankind was not only light. Along with it came contradictions, mistakes, and tragedies. For bearing the breath of the gods, humans also carried the universe's disorder. They could love, but also envy, create but also destroy. That is what set them apart from other creatures. Enki granted them intelligence, but he also knew that such intellect might make them raise their heads too high. Enlil, the god of authority, began to fear that humans would exceed their bounds and upset the order set by the gods. Thus, the relationship between gods and humans became a long, tense thread, like the line that ties heaven to earth, close yet fragile. The gods could grant gentle rains, but they could also punish with flood or drought. Humans felt gratitude, but they also began to doubt, to ask about justice, about will, about the reason for their creation. Those questions became the first flame of human philosophy, a fire born from mud and divine breath. If in Greek myth, Prometheus stole fire for humankind, in Sumerian culture, Enki was the god who shared the fire of knowledge. He did not steal but taught. He did not hide but opened his heart. For this, Enki became an image of compassion and selfless wisdom, one who dared to act against the will of other gods to save humankind from destruction, as in the tale of the Great Flood. Enki taught them writing, taught them to mark time, taught them how to live within the cosmos's order. Thus, humans were not merely laborers for the gods, but narrators of the gods' story. Symbolically, humans created from earth and blood form a beautiful allegory. We are the blending of matter and spirit, of Mother Earth and cosmic soul. Earth gives us body, blood gives us life, and divine breath gives us consciousness. Every breath, every heartbeat of humankind is a small echo of that primordial divine breath. And so, at the core of their being, humans always turn toward the sky, the place where half their origin lies. The Sumerians left hundreds of texts about that creation, not as a fairy tale, but as a covenant between two worlds. They understood that to sustain existence, humans must live with respect for the gods and nature. Every wrong act, from destroying crops, wasting water, to deceiving others, insulted the cosmic order. From this thought emerged the concept of a sacred law, the law of the gods, which gradually formed the foundation of later religions. Yet among all the gifts the gods bestowed upon humans, the most precious was not life itself, but self-awareness. When humans knew they were born of earth, they learned humility. When they knew they carried divine blood, they learned to aspire. That struggle between the two halves, divine and human, created both the tragedy and the eternal beauty of humanity. And when night fell over the Sumerian plain, by the light of flickering fires, people told the story of their origin, of gentle Enki, of Ninhursag the birther, of the first breath blown into clay. They told these tales not just to remember, but to affirm that they were part of the cosmos, no longer lost between heaven and earth. Those stories, passed from generation to generation, became the bedrock of human thought on creation, soul, and the meaning of existence. Viewed from today, we might call these tales myth, allegory, or proto-philosophy. But at their core, the Sumerians spoke a truth modern science cannot deny. We come from the earth, and to the earth we shall return. The only difference is that during that brief journey, we learn to love, to remember, and to tell our story, just as the Sumerians told of the Anunnaki long ago. Perhaps that is why the tale, The Birth of Humankind, is never merely a beginning. It is a reminder that every living being carries a piece of the cosmos, that even if time sweeps away cities and empires, that breath, the first breath from Enki's hand, continues to live in every heart, in every dream, in every longing for understanding. From the distant Sumerian clay, humankind took its first steps, slow, clumsy, yet full of light, toward the future, where questions about origin still echo. And in tonight's gentle sleep, when we close our eyes, perhaps in the last breath before sleep takes us, we are still listening to the whisper of the Anunnaki, the gods who granted us the greatest gift, awareness to exist, and memory to tell the tale. But as with all ancient tales, when humankind gained awareness, when they began to gaze at the heavens and question their own destiny, pride quietly began to grow within their hearts. They built cities, they sang songs of their own creation, and at times they forgot that they had once been born from clay, from the breath of the gods themselves. Prayers became fewer, offerings more ceremonial, and the noise of mankind spread across the earth, reaching even the ears of the gods above. It was then that one of the most tragic chapters in Sumerian mythology began. The Great Flood, the divine wrath that cleansed the world to restore order. According to the Atrahasis legend, the world had fallen into chaos. Humanity multiplied without control, becoming noisy, lazy, greedy, and increasingly detached from their duties to the gods. Their voices, their songs, the hammering of tools, the quarreling among them echoed up to the heavens, disturbing Enlil, the god of air and authority. He, the strict guardian of order, saw this noise as a sign that the world was slipping from the pattern the Anunnaki had established. Mankind has forgotten its place, Enlil said, and when a creation forgets its origin, the world must be purified. Thus, Enlil began a chain of catastrophes. First, he dried the fields and cut off the waters, leaving humanity in misery. But when they still survived, praying and crying out for mercy, Enlil's anger deepened. He unleashed plague and famine upon the land, yet mankind endured, pleading to other gods for help. And among the divine, only Enki, the god of wisdom and water, watched silently. His compassionate heart could not bear the sight of humankind, the children he had helped create, being destroyed by his brother's rage. When Enlil finally decided upon the ultimate punishment, the flood that would wipe everything from the earth, Enki knew he had to act, even if it meant defying the will of the divine council. In secret, he whispered through a wall of clay to Atrahasis, the most righteous and gentle man among humankind. "Listen to me," Enki said softly through the mud. "Cut wood, build a great ship, seal it with pitch. Bring your family, seeds of life, and the creatures of the earth aboard. For the waters are coming, and only those who prepare shall survive." Atrahasis obeyed. He worked tirelessly as the skies darkened and black clouds gathered above the mountains. When the vessel was completed, Enlil commanded the gates of heaven to open. Thunder roared, the winds howled, the sea rose and swallowed the Sumerian plains. For 7 days and 7 nights, rain poured without end, turning the world into a vast ocean. The cities of Ur, Eridu, Nippur, all vanished beneath the fury. The cries of humanity were swept away by the wind, and when the final sun disappeared behind the clouds, only waves remained. White foam and the stillness of death. Yet within the sealed ark, Atrahasis and the living beings he had saved endured. When the storm subsided, he opened the hatch and looked out upon a different world. cleansed, empty, as if newly born. He released a dove, then a swallow, but neither found land. Finally, he released a raven, and it did not return. The earth was dry. Atrahasis stepped out and offered the first sacrifice of the new world, smoke rising softly, fragrant and pure. The gods smelled its sweetness. And in that moment, they remembered that mankind was not only noise, but prayer, faith, and the scent of life itself. When Enlil looked down, he realized he had gone too far. The world could not exist in silence and order alone. Humanity, with all its flaws, was a mirror of the divine. Chaotic, yet capable of love. Fragile, yet capable of repentance. From that understanding, a new covenant was made. The gods agreed that humankind would live on, but their lifespan and fertility would be limited to prevent imbalance once more. Order was restored, not through destruction, but through the understanding of boundaries. The Sumerian story of the Great Flood is not merely a precursor to the tales of Noah or Deucalion. It is a profound allegory of the relationship between gods and men. It does not simply tell of a natural disaster, but of spiritual renewal. Water, in Sumerian belief, is a dual symbol, both life and annihilation. When it rises, it washes away sin, yet it also sweeps away all that is familiar. When it recedes, it leaves behind a new beginning, pure but heavy with memory. And in that devastation, humankind realized one truth. The gods were not entirely good, nor were humans entirely evil. Between the two extremes lay a bond woven from understanding. Enki did not rebel out of arrogance, but out of compassion. Enlil was not cruel out of hatred, but out of fear of disorder. They were two sides of the same coin. Wisdom and power, water and wind, empathy and discipline, together shaping the destiny of humankind. Seen through modern eyes, the story may be read as a reflection of nature's cycles. When society grows beyond its limits, chaos follows. And when chaos reigns, nature intervenes to restore balance. The flood in Sumer was not merely divine punishment, but the breath of the earth itself, erasing the old to make room for the new. This is the living philosophy the Sumerians grasped thousands of years ago. All things exist only when they can balance themselves. Atrahasis, the lone man amid the wrath of the gods, became a symbol of human resilience and wisdom. He did not defy the gods, nor curse them. He listened, acted, and held his faith. His image, standing on the prow of his ship as the waters receded, is our own reflection, small beings swept by the flood of time, yet still believing in the light beyond the storm. And when the waters withdrew, when Atrahasis set foot on dry land, he restored not only life but morality itself. That new world was no longer built upon the gods' absolute power, but upon the spiritual bond between humankind and the cosmos. Every act, every word, every seed sown carried within it the lesson of the flood. That order cannot be maintained through fear, but through awareness. From then on, the Sumerians reminded their descendants that water is the memory of the gods. Every time the rain fell, they remembered Enki, the god who saved humanity. Every time the rivers rose, they spoke of Enlil, the god who taught them fear and reverence. The story of the Great Flood became a living ritual in their consciousness, a mixture of terror, solace, and wisdom, a reminder that balance is the foundation of existence. Today, when the clay tablets retelling this legend are unearthed, one does not merely read an ancient tale, but hears the voice of the past, the whisper of water, of earth, of those who once feared and those who were once saved. The Great Flood, in every culture, is not only a story of destruction, but a hymn of rebirth. And perhaps that is what makes Sumerian mythology eternal. For every time humankind forgets its limits, every time the world trembles in chaos, we tell this story again, as a prayer, a warning, and a promise that after every flood, there will always be another shore, another Atrahasis, and another beginning, where humanity learns to live, not only in the world of the gods, but within the quiet depths of its own heart. When the waters of the Great Flood withdrew, the world entered a new era, peaceful, yet steeped in the haunting memory of what had been lost. People rebuilt their lives from the ashes. They raised houses again, re-sowed the fields, and restored prayers that had been forgotten. Yet after every catastrophe, history leaves a fissure, a small crack in the collective mind where both fear and longing begin to take root. From that very crack, a new civilization slowly rose, inheriting the radiance of Sumer but bearing a different spirit. Stronger, more organized, hungrier for power. That civilization was Babylon, the great heir of Mesopotamia, where humankind began to write its next chapter. If Sumer was the dawn of human wisdom, when gods still walked the plains and people could hear their voices, then Babylon was the blazing noon, where the light of knowledge and authority reached its peak, and where pride began to color that brilliance. This civilization did not merely receive Sumer's legacy, writing, religion, law, myth. It reshaped them, turning these gifts into tools of a new order, the order of kings, of cities, of centralized power. The transition from Sumer to Babylon was not a collapse, but a quiet, profound transformation. The Babylonians did not tear down what Sumer had left. They absorbed it like clay takes water, then molded it into their own form. The old gods continued to be worshipped, but their names, roles, and powers began to change. Enlil, Enki, Inanna, Utu. These deities, who once governed the cosmos, gradually found themselves regrouped beneath a new supreme deity, Marduk, the emblem of Babylonian ambition and order. The tale of Marduk's victory over Tiamat in the epic Enuma Elish was not merely a heroic poem, it was a political declaration for a whole civilization. In it, Marduk, the young god of Babylon, defeats the chaotic goddess Tiamat, tears her body apart, and fashions heaven and earth from her remains. From chaos is born order, from death, the world, a metaphor for Babylon's own journey. From the ruins of the Great Flood, they forged a new order with humanity at its center. No longer would capricious gods alone determine fate. This was the age of law, of covenants, of kingship. The Babylonians understood that to maintain the world required not only divine favor, but human control. The clearest symbol of this belief is the Code of Hammurabi, a towering stone stele set in the desert, where law ceases to be the vague utterance of the divine and becomes the carved decree of humankind. At the top of that stele, King Hammurabi receives the scepter from Shamash, the sun god and symbol of justice. Behind that religious image lies a deeper message. The gods grant authority to humans, but humans must be accountable for that power. Thus, the notion of a sacred order gradually transformed into a social order, a pivotal turning point in human thought. This change did not remain confined to politics and law. It spread through religion and philosophy. While the Sumerians had seen the gods as mysterious, volatile beings, the Babylonians began to systematize the divine sphere, organizing it like the bureaucracy of an empire. Each god had an office, a rank, a domain, a royal court in heaven, mirroring the order of the royal court on earth. There, Marduk was not only a creator deity but king of the gods, guardian of justice and order. So whereas Sumer dreamed of a sacred bond between humans and the heavens, Babylon dreamed of a world governed by reason and rules. Where Sumer perceived the cosmos as a mystical poem, Babylon saw a machine run by laws. This intellectual shift opened the way for later developments in philosophy, science, and politics across the Near East. Yet beneath Babylon's dazzling light lay a quiet shadow. When order is enforced too tightly, when laws become shackles, people begin to lose something once sacred, their natural connection to the divine world. Prayers no longer ring with the sincere voice of the soul. They become formal rituals. Temples grow taller, while hearts grow emptier. The legendary Tower of Babel, a monument the Babylonians once took pride in, stands as a vivid emblem of this truth. It was more than a feat of engineering and ambition. It signaled a civilization challenging its own limits. As men endeavored to touch the sky, they forgot that the sky had once bent toward them. And so, in a cycle of history, pride gave birth to chaos once more. Yet we cannot deny that from that very pride, Babylon reached the pinnacle of ancient civilization. They built magnificent cities, the mythical hanging gardens, gilded temples, and libraries storing thousands of clay tablets containing knowledge accumulated over centuries. They charted the stars, measured time, calculated the cycles of the cosmos. And from that, for the first time, humankind realized they could discern the laws of heaven and earth without waiting for a god's decree. This was the birth of rational thought, of the spirit of inquiry, of the hunger for mastery of knowledge. Babylon, in a sense, became the bridge between myth and humanity, between legend and history, between faith and reason. From there, humankind took a longer step on the path of redefining itself, but every greatness contains the seed of downfall. When order rises too high, it becomes brittle. When kingship becomes absolute, freedom withers. Subsequent empires followed to rule those lands: Assyria, Chaldea, Persia. Yet within every dynasty, the echoes of Sumer and Babylon remained, like distant voices of the first people who dared to dream, to build, and to challenge even the gods. Thus, the transition from Sumer to Babylon was not merely a change of dynasties, but an evolution in human consciousness. From living in fearful deference to gods, people learned to shape the world with their reason. From begging, they began to create. From being victims of fate, they became authors of destiny. And that is Babylon's greatest legacy. Not the golden bricks or the sky-reaching towers, but the idea that order can be fashioned by human hands, an idea both proud and perilous. For it is the source of civilization and of catastrophe alike. When we look back upon this journey, we see the history of Mesopotamia like a great river, Sumer the pure source, Babylon the fierce bend, and the downstream flow carrying humankind steadily toward its own self. Yet through all seasons, the echoes of those two civilizations persist. In every law, every monument, every prayer, for after all transformations, humanity continues its most ancient voyage, the search for balance between power and faith, between reason and spirit, between order and freedom, a journey that began in Sumer's clay and was rewritten in Babylon's golden light. And then, like every other pinnacle in history, the radiance of Babylon began to fade, when their sky-reaching towers gathered dust. When the chants to Marduk grew faint in the night, the world once again began to change. Beneath the rubble of once glorious cities, humankind started to sense something deeper, that nothing lasts forever, not even the power of the gods. And in that stillness, the image of the Anunnaki, the creators, the divine rulers of heaven, began to shift quietly, stepping down from their celestial thrones into the deep-shadowed realms, becoming the deities of the underworld, of death, and of judgment. This transformation was not a sudden turn, but the slow crystallization of thousands of years of thought and turmoil. As humanity came to understand more of the material world, they also began to see the fragility of life. Death no longer seemed distant, but ever present, waiting behind each breath. And so the gods too had to change, reflecting that very human awareness. From givers of rain and light, the Anunnaki became guardians of the threshold between life and nothingness. In the mythic texts of post-Babylonian times, especially during the late Assyrian and Akkadian eras, this shift becomes clear. The Anunnaki no longer appear as a heavenly council, but as 7 judges of the underworld, beneath the rule of Ereshkigal, the Queen of Darkness, and Nergal, the god of war and plague. If Marduk symbolized order and reason, then Ereshkigal embodied the raw truth of death, an order that none could resist. To the Mesopotamians, the underworld was not hell in a moral sense, but simply the place all souls must go. There was no paradise, no salvation, only shadow, dust, and faint memories of what once was. And within that somber realm, the Anunnaki served as perfectly just judges. They did not punish, nor did they show mercy. They simply maintained the balance between life and death, between the world above and the one below. What's remarkable is that this descent of the Anunnaki did not strip them of reverence. It made them closer to humanity. Once, they had lived too high above, in unreachable skies that humans could only gaze upon. Now, they dwelled in a place where all would one day arrive, beneath the earth, in silence, where every soul was equal. Perhaps that is why the Mesopotamians did not fear death as other civilizations did. To them, death was not an ending, but the beginning of another order, one still guarded by the Anunnaki, the keepers of divine justice. From a symbolic view, this transformation mirrors a shift in human consciousness, from worshipping external forces of nature, rain, thunder, wind, the sun, to turning inward, toward life, death, and the essence of being. Over time, the myth of the Anunnaki became a mirror reflecting both fear and hope. When humans no longer prayed for the gods to bless their crops, they prayed for them to guard their eternal rest. The figure of Ereshkigal, the goddess of the underworld, stands as one of the most beautiful symbols of this transformation. She is not cruel nor cold, like the death gods of many other faiths. She is silent, powerful, and solitary. In the myth of Inanna's descent, the goddess of love and war, we witness one of the most human moments in Mesopotamian lore. When Inanna is captured by Ereshkigal, hung on a meat hook like a corpse, and only when she learns the pain of death is she allowed to return to life. Hidden within that tale lies the philosophy of rebirth through death. The idea that to truly understand life, one must first face the void. In their new form, the Anunnaki became the keepers of memory. They no longer ruled the storms or the sunlight. Instead, they guarded the souls of the world. Every soul passing through the underworld carried a story, and the Anunnaki were its silent storytellers. They became the embodiment of memory itself, the only thing that time and power could never erase. If we look across the great arc from Sumer to Babylon and beyond, we see a graceful curve of faith. At first, the gods created humanity. Then, they worked alongside them to shape the world. And finally, when humankind grew strong enough to write laws, build towers and chart the stars, the gods stepped back into shadow, leaving behind freedom and the burden of destiny. But the Anunnaki never vanished. They merely changed their place within the collective imagination, from thrones of creation to the kingdom of endings. Like the law of nature, the sun must set before dawn can rise. Their retreat was an act of perfect order. They were not dethroned, but chose to descend, balancing the eternal wheel of existence. And in that surrender, they became greater than ever. In the Mesopotamian night, when wandering souls searched for the path to the underworld, people believed 7 faint flames still burned, the light of the 7 Anunnaki. They did not save nor punish. They only guided so that no soul would lose its way across the river of darkness. That feeling, both terrifying and comforting, reveals a faith that had touched the deepest layer of the human spirit, acceptance of death as an inseparable part of life. If in Sumer the Anunnaki symbolized beginnings, then in this age they came to represent the end. From the earth they once shaped mankind, and to the earth mankind returns, the perfect circle of being. Perhaps that is why, in many ancient carvings, the underworld Anunnaki are not monstrous, but serene, majestic, and calm. They sit in quiet rows, eyes half closed, as if listening to the heartbeat of the living world above. The transformation of the Anunnaki into deities of the underworld, in the end, marks the maturation of human faith itself. From simple longing for life, humanity had learned to face death with reverence and understanding. It was a leap not only in mythology, but in the human soul. For after all, the Anunnaki were never merely gods of legend. They were reflections of ourselves, beings forever seeking meaning in a world of contradictions. When we create, we are the Anunnaki of the heavens. When we reflect, we are the Anunnaki of the earth. And when we bow our heads and accept the end, we become the Anunnaki of the underworld, spirits preserving harmony between chaos and stillness. Perhaps that is why, even after thousands of years, the name Anunnaki still stirs the heart, not out of fear, but awe, for they stand as proof of a simple yet profound truth, that everything born must one day return, and in that eternal journey, the only thing that remains is balance between light and shadow, between life and death. And then, as the wheel of time turned, even the gods who once ruled the underworld were slowly buried beneath the very earth they had guarded. Dust covered their temples, the Tigris and Euphrates changed their course, and the cities that once glimmered like stars were now only silent mounds scattered across the desert. People changed, empires rose and fell, and the name Anunnaki, once the symbol of cosmic order, faded away, like a distant echo in the memory of humankind. For millennia, the cuneiform signs etched into cracked clay tablets remained mute, until the modern world, by sheer accident or fate, heard their voices once again. It was a miraculous moment, rebirth in silence. After thousands of years of oblivion, broken shards of pottery, engraved bricks, and buried tombs began to tell their story anew. In the 19th century, as the West entered an age of science and exploration, the first archaeologists set foot upon the land between 2 legendary rivers. In Nineveh, Ur, Eridu, and Nippur, they uncovered thousands of clay tablets, living proof of a civilization humanity once believed had vanished forever. amid the sands of Mesopotamia. Men like Henry Rawlinson, Austin Henry Layard, and Leonard Woolley dug deep into the earth, not merely to find relics, but to awaken the past. And when they began deciphering the cuneiform script, each ancient character came alive, like a whisper from the souls of the Anunnaki reaching out from the depths of time. One afternoon in Nineveh, in 1853, when Rawlinson picked up a small clay tablet, he could not have imagined that he held in his hands a fragment of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest known literary work of humankind. In those lines, humanity spoke of life and death, of fear before fate, and somewhere within them glimmered the shadow of the Anunnaki, the judges of souls, the keepers of eternal order. That single discovery changed how humankind viewed its past. The ancient world was no longer a primitive age, but a civilization rich with wisdom, depth, and humanity. The Anunnaki were no longer mere myth. They became symbols of the beginning of thought, of belief, and of awareness of order itself. What is most striking is that the rebirth of the Anunnaki happened quietly. They returned to the modern world, not with thunder, but through each translation, each study, each classroom lecture. Their names reappeared first in academic texts, then in popular culture, films, novels, and even conspiracy theories. The word Anunnaki, once a symbol of divine balance, now surfaced in debates about aliens, human origins, and visitors from the stars. And though truth and imagination often intertwine, the Anunnaki still hold a strange and powerful allure, for they mirror humanity's eternal longing to know where we came from and where we are going. As archaeologists dug deeper into the earth, they unearthed not only ruins, but also that same primal yearning to rediscover the meaning of existence itself. The long silence of millennia was, in truth, a test of human memory. Not every civilization is granted rebirth. Who remembers the first builders of Eridu's temple? Who still knows the songs once sung to Enki over cups of sacred wine? And yet somehow, the cuneiform marks, pressed into fragile clay, so easily shattered, survived thousands of years of storms and shifting sands. Perhaps the Anunnaki themselves, gods of justice and order, silently guarded that memory, waiting until humankind was mature enough to listen again to its own story. And when that story was heard once more, the modern world shuddered. For the words written by the Sumerians and Babylonians 4,000 years ago spoke eerily of the same questions we still ask today: power and responsibility, order and chaos, life and death, faith and reason. The Anunnaki, though long descended into shadow, became a mirror reflecting the unchanging essence of humankind, that no matter how advanced we become, we are still moving within the same eternal cycle of light and darkness. The ruins unearthed at Ur and Nippur revealed that the Sumerians once built colossal temples called ziggurats, places where they believed the gods could descend from the heavens to speak with mortals. And when archaeologists found them, thousands of years later, that feeling remained intact. This was the place where heaven once touched the earth. Strangely, such discoveries made modern humans feel smaller, for they realized that their distant ancestors, though lacking machines or electricity, had understood the universe and the soul more deeply than we ever imagined. Thus, the rediscovery of the Anunnaki was not merely an archaeological story, but a dialogue between past and present, between clay tablets and glowing screens, between ancient prayers and the warm voice of a modern storyteller. One thread remains unbroken: curiosity and reverence. These two forces built civilization, and they still remind us to bow before the mysteries we cannot yet comprehend. Today, the name Anunnaki still echoes through popular culture, a resonance where science and myth entwine. Some believe they were beings from the stars, sowers of life upon Earth. Others see them as metaphors for ancient ruling classes, those who held power and shaped history. Yet whatever the interpretation, they all reveal one truth: humanity has never stopped searching for the Anunnaki, and through them, for ourselves. But perhaps the deepest meaning of this rediscovery lies in humility. For when we stand before the hand-carved tablets of the Sumerians, those fragile lines about floods, creation, and death, we suddenly realize the greatest questions of humanity were asked at the very beginning. we are merely continuing that same conversation, in new words, within a different world. There is something strange, almost tender, in reading those ancient texts. The farther we reach back, the more familiar they feel. Not because they are easy to understand, but because they remind us of what never changes. From the farmers by the Euphrates to the scientists of the 21st century, all share the same longing to understand the cosmos, to understand ourselves, and to find the meaning of existence. Thus, the forgetting of the Anunnaki was never truly a loss. It was a long sleep, a necessary slumber that allowed humankind to grow, so that when it awoke, it could understand them with a wiser heart. And when archaeologists brushed away the dust of millennia from those clay tablets, when sunlight touched their names for the first time in 4,000 years, perhaps the gods smiled, for they knew humanity was ready to listen once more. The Anunnaki have been rediscovered, not as distant deities of legend, but as symbols of human memory itself, proof that nothing is ever truly lost, only buried for a time beneath the sands of eternity. And perhaps, when night falls, in the hush of a story meant to lull the soul to rest, we can still hear their voices, slow, contemplative, like the breath of history itself, reminding us that every civilization may be forgotten, but none ever truly disappears. And so, after thousands of years buried beneath the earth, after countless excavations, manuscripts, and silent decipherments in hidden laboratories, the Anunnaki were awakened once more. But this time, they did not return as mighty gods crowned in glory, nor as rulers descending from the stars. They returned as a mirror, reflecting the very soul of humankind. For in the end, what kept the Anunnaki alive was never divine power, but the meaning that human beings gave to them. And as the dust of history began to lift, as myth and truth slowly intertwined, one question remained. What is the core message that the story of the Anunnaki seeks to tell humanity? Perhaps the Anunnaki were never merely gods. Perhaps they were a metaphor for the eternal nature of humankind, both creators and destroyers, hungry for power, yet trembling before their own limits. Their story is a spiritual map, guiding us through the evolution of awareness, from the moment humans first lifted their eyes to the heavens and asked, "Where did we come from?" to the moment we became wise enough to realize that the answer was never among the stars, but quietly beating within our own hearts. In Sumerian myth, the Anunnaki were the deities who shaped the world, gave order to the universe, created humankind, and later punished them with the Great Flood. Yet if we strip away the cloak of mythology, what remains beneath is the symbol of a greater cycle, of creation and destruction, the unchanging rhythm of every civilization, of life itself. Every culture, like every human being, is born, grows, and fades. But with each fall, humanity learns something new, evolving a little further in understanding. In their deepest meaning, the Anunnaki are the reflection of that very process, not just gods of Sumer, but embodiments of the invisible force that shapes life, wisdom, and destiny. Yet the wonder of the Anunnaki lies not only in their philosophy of order or creation, but in how they compel us to question ourselves. When the Sumerians said that humans were made to serve the gods, they spoke of more than servitude and masters. They spoke of the relationship between existence and responsibility. If we were made by a higher power, what is our duty? And if we are merely the result of chance, what gives our lives meaning at all? Beneath the myth of the Anunnaki hides a profound philosophical message that order cannot exist without chaos, and light cannot shine without shadow. The Sumerians, the first people to write, to count, to build a society, were also the first to grasp that the universe is a fragile balance. The Anunnaki stood as guardians of that balance, yet they were also the chaos buried within it. And when humankind learned to accept that duality, it took one great step toward becoming truly human. Thus, the story of the Anunnaki is not merely about history or religion. It is an allegory for the spiritual growth of mankind. From believing that everything was ruled by gods, to realizing that we too can create, humanity has slowly become the Anunnaki. We learn to forge tools, to make laws, to build civilizations, and finally to create meaning itself. If the Anunnaki once created humankind, then humankind, through culture and knowledge, has been recreating the Anunnaki within its own mind ever since. But what makes their story truly timeless is the cosmic loneliness it speaks of. The Anunnaki, on another level, embody the longing to reach beyond our limits. The Sumerians looked to the heavens and believed their gods came from there. And today, thousands of years later, we too lift our eyes to the same sky, sending out radio signals, searching for life beyond Earth. The image is nearly the same, only the tools have changed. Instead of prayer, we use technology, yet the question remains unchanged. Are we alone in the universe? And perhaps that is why the Anunnaki have never truly left human imagination, for they are the living symbol of our faith that we are not alone. The true meaning of the Anunnaki, then, does not depend on whether they were real. It lies in the way their story taught humanity to believe in something greater than itself. Every great civilization begins with a belief in gods, in nature, or in mankind. For Sumer, that belief was the Anunnaki, and it was that very belief that drove them to build cities, to found kingdoms, to invent writing, mathematics, astronomy, and art. To speak of the Anunnaki is to speak of the first spark that led humankind out of the darkness of ignorance. Thus, when the Anunnaki died, they did not vanish. They merely transformed into consciousness. For what the Sumerians once called gods, we now call laws. Rebirth, justice, consequence, creation, all are modern echoes of the ancient Anunnaki myth. They have become the metaphorical language through which we understand the world, the cycles of society, and the endless dance of cause and effect. And there is something remarkable here. In their myths, the Anunnaki were neither wholly good nor wholly evil. They could bless or they could punish. They loved humanity, yet despised its weakness. And that is precisely what makes them so eerily similar to us. The Anunnaki symbolize the contradictions within every human soul. We wish to create, yet we fear. We long for freedom, yet seek guidance. We crave love, yet yearn for power. Their story is not just about gods. It is the story of the human spirit, told through the language of myth. Therefore, the core meaning of the Anunnaki is not a statement, but an open question. It invites each of us to find the Anunnaki within ourselves, the part that dreams, that fears, that creates, and that dares to rise beyond fate. When we listen to their story, not merely to fall asleep, but to awaken, we realize that what the Anunnaki left behind was not power, but responsibility, the responsibility of those who know they can shape the world. And in the end, as their stories fade softly into the night, what remains is the warm resonance of a philosophy that transcends time, that every civilization is a reflection of human belief, and that belief, whether named Anunnaki, God, Creator, or science, springs from the same seed, the desire to understand. The Anunnaki are not the story of gods long gone, but the story of how humanity rediscovers itself. They remind us that nothing is truly eternal, except one thing, meaning. And as long as we continue to tell their tale, in words, in images, or in the soothing voice of a story whispered into the night, the Anunnaki will still be alive, beating gently within the human heart. And so, as the last glimmer of Anunnaki light fades upon the horizon of human memory, we realize that what remains are not temples, not clay tablets, not the wedge-shaped inscriptions, but the endless question of what it means to be human. The journey to seek meaning through myth has not only helped us understand the divine, but also ourselves, our fears, our faith, our desires, and our limits. And that is when we step into the final part of this long voyage, the conclusion, where every fragment of the Anunnaki story flows together like rivers joining the sea, serene, profound, and yet quietly alive. From the muddy plains of Mesopotamia, where the first Sumerian farmers planted barley seeds into cracked earth, humankind began one of history's greatest revolutions. There, people learned to tame nature, to preserve memory through symbols, and to tell stories. From simple tales of rain, thunder, rivers, and harvests, they gradually wove magnificent myths, with the Anunnaki at their very heart. These stories shaped humanity's earliest understanding of the cosmos, of origins, and of the order that binds the world. If we look back upon that journey, we see that the Anunnaki were not merely ancient gods, but the first footprints of human thought. They appeared within our earliest questions. Who created us? Why do we exist? What governs our fate? The Sumerians' answers, though cloaked in sacred language, contained a rare wisdom, that the world has order, and within that order, humankind has a role. From this seed, one might say, the Anunnaki became the beginning of philosophy, of law, of morality, and of religion itself. It is easy to dismiss the Anunnaki as old tales with no value, yet if we look deeper, their meaning still echoes through our modern world. Whenever we speak of justice, we are invoking Utu, the Sumerian sun god. Whenever we speak of creation and wisdom, we are recalling Enki. Whenever we speak of love and war, we echo the image of Inanna, both enchanting and ruthless. And whenever we speak of power, of rulers who decide the fate of others, we continue the stories of Enlil and Marduk, the first archetypes of absolute authority within the human mind. Seen this way, the Anunnaki did not die. They transformed. From ancient deities, they became symbols, ideas, even desires buried deep within every soul. They live on in the ways we organize society, in how we define order and justice. And if there is one truth the Anunnaki have taught us, it is this: everything humanity creates begins with belief. Belief in something greater than ourselves, whether we call it gods, the universe, or reason. When Sumerian civilization faded, when cuneiform vanished beneath layers of time, the last hand that pressed symbols into clay could never have imagined that thousands of years later, the world would once again speak of the Anunnaki, not as gods to be worshipped, but as figures rising from humanity's collective memory. They are proof that nothing is ever truly forgotten. As long as someone remembers, as long as someone tells the story, the myth continues to live. And it is through these very stories that humankind not only survived the darkness of forgetting, but learned to create its own light. But if we ask, what is it that keeps the Anunnaki alive, that makes us curious even after 4 millennia? Perhaps it is because their story touches the most sacred longing within the human soul, the desire to understand, to connect, to believe that we are not insignificant in the vast universe. For the ancients, the Anunnaki were a way to explain what they could not yet comprehend. For us, they are a way to remember where knowledge began. From a symbolic view, the Anunnaki are like a faint lamp flickering in the long night of human awareness. That fragile light guided us into the dawn of civilization. Through them, we began to think about origins. We learned to fear laws, to revere nature, to cherish life. And from that mixture of fear and curiosity came the greatest of all creations, consciousness. Without the Anunnaki, perhaps there would be no ideas of soul, destiny, or justice, the very concepts that continue to define humanity today. Thus, the story of the Anunnaki is not merely the tale of a vanished people, but the tale of how humanity created itself. They began by creating gods, and through those gods, learned to create law, morality, art, and culture. They used myth to organize life, and faith to preserve their communities. So we see that mythology was never ignorance, but a primal form of philosophy, where wisdom and belief were one. And now, as we tell this story again, here, within the quiet stillness of a boring history for sleep video, we are not only lulling someone into rest, but breathing life back into history itself. For every retelling, every voice, every listener is a way the Anunnaki are reborn. In the hush of night, as the dim lamp casts its glow across the desk, we can almost hear the sound of clay falling, the scratch of reed pens, the whisper of Mesopotamian winds over the barley fields. All of it blending into the voice of the storyteller, becoming a symphony of memory. Perhaps that is the Anunnaki's final miracle. Not power, but connection across time. They make us, the people of the 21st century, feel close to those who lived 4,000 years ago. They remind us that every story, no matter how ancient, begins with the same longing, to be understood, to be believed in, and to be remembered. And so, as this video draws to a close, As the voice gently fades into the dark, let the images remain. The gods of light and shadow, the hands carving into clay, the fields under the Mesopotamian moon, dissolving softly into your mind like a long dream. A dream not meant for forgetting, but for remembering where we came from. For in the end, the Anunnaki are not merely a story of the past. They are the symbol of humanity's collective memory. A reminder that we once rose from the mud, fragile yet determined to write our myths into being. And within every breath, every dream, every story we share with one another, the Anunnaki still live, in imagination, in faith, and in the quiet heartbeat of the night. As you close your eyes, imagine standing in the ancient land of Sumer. Feel the wind passing over forgotten ruins, the scent of dry earth, the dust of time, there where it all began. The Anunnaki still whisper their story, and ours. A story with no ending, only the eternal flow of humankind, of history, and of dreams. When the lights slowly fade and the sounds of the world outside begin to dissolve, the story of the Anunnaki still lingers somewhere in the quiet, like an echo from a distant past, from those ancient gods who once held the fate of humanity in their hands. We may never truly know whether they existed, or were merely born from the boundless imagination of early civilizations. Yet one thing remains certain. It was the belief in them that shaped the first foundations of civilization, the first written words, and the first human yearning to reach for the divine. If you're still awake, let your mind drift gently along the current of time, to a place where history, myth, and dreams flow into one another. And if your eyes have already closed, rest easy, for stories like this will continue night after night, guiding you softly through thousands of years of history with a calm, endless voice. So, if you've enjoyed this quiet journey, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts below. So I'll know you're still here with me, listening to the oldest tales humanity has ever whispered.